The grand ballroom fell into a sudden, suffocating silence as the heavy gold doors swung open to reveal a woman whose presence shattered the evening's artificial perfection. 300 of Seoul's most powerful people turned at once. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Conversations died mid-sentence. Jung Tae-min turned last. And when he saw her, his whole body went cold. Because the woman standing in the doorway, spine straight, chin lifted, wrapped in indigo silk that moved like water, was supposed to be at home. Small, quiet, forgotten. She was supposed to be his wife, Amina Diallo, the woman he'd left behind 2 hours earlier with a sentence that was meant to end her. It hadn't ended her. It had woken her up. 6 hours earlier, the apartment was quiet in the way rooms get quiet right before something breaks. Amina stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching her husband adjust his cufflinks in the mirror. Tae-min didn't turn around. He never did, not anymore. He spoke to her reflection instead, like she was something he could address without really facing. "You're not coming tonight," he said. Amina blinked. "The Hamu Gala? Tae-min, I helped you prepare the guest list. I know half the board members personally. That's exactly the problem." He finally turned, and there was no softness left in his face, only the tight, calculating look he wore in boardrooms. "Every investor who matters will be in that room tonight. Every partner I need for the Busan expansion. I need to walk in looking like a man who has arrived, not a man who married this." He gestured at her. All of her. Her skin, her hair, her quiet dignity, dismissed with the flick of a wrist. Something in Amina's chest went very still, the way water goes still right before it freezes. "Say what you actually mean," she said quietly. "You don't fit the image, Amina. You never have. So I'm bringing someone who does." "Someone," Amina repeated. "You mean Yoon Seo-hee?" His silence was answer enough. 3 years, Tae-min, she said. 3 years of dinners I planned, deals I helped you close, a household I built so you'd never have to think about anything but climbing. And tonight you're telling me I'm not elegant enough to stand next to you. I'm telling you the truth for once," he said, straightening his jacket. Someone had to. He walked past her without another word, without a glance, and the front door closed with a sound so final it felt like punctuation on a sentence that had been building for years. Amina stood alone in the apartment, the silence roaring in her ears. She did not cry. She picked up her phone instead, and dialed a number she hadn't used in over a year, a number that belonged to a different version of her life, back before she folded herself small enough to fit inside Tae-min's ambitions. The call connected on the second ring. "Amina," said the voice on the other end, warm with disbelief. "It's been forever. Is everything okay?" Amina looked at herself in the hallway mirror, a woman she barely recognized, shoulders curled inward, eyes dimmed by years of shrinking. "No," she said, "but it's about to be. Grace, I need your help tonight. And I need it fast." Grace Adeyemi arrived at the apartment 20 minutes later, dropping her bag on the counter without ceremony. She had been Amina's closest friend during graduate school, back when Amina's name was already being whispered in academic circles, long before it became Tae-min's wife and nothing more. Now she ran one of Seoul's most respected contemporary art foundations, and the moment Amina finished telling her what had happened tonight, Grace's expression shifted from sympathy into something harder. "There's something you need to know," Grace said. 6 months ago, I put your name forward for the Lee Foundation's curatorial board. Obvious choice. Your dissertation on diasporic art is still being cited. But your husband called the committee personally and asked them to reconsider. Said you weren't ready for that kind of visibility. Amina went very still. "He never told me any of that. There's more. A guest lecture at UA. A group exhibition downtown. Both times, Tae-min reached out first. Both times, you were quietly dropped from consideration." The words landed like a slow, spreading bruise. It wasn't just tonight. It wasn't just the model. For months, maybe longer, Tae-min had been dismantling her one opportunity at a time, making sure she stayed small enough to never outshine him. "He wasn't just ashamed of me," Amina said slowly. "He was afraid of me." "So what do you want to do about it?" Grace asked. "Not what's easiest. What do you want?" Amina looked at the closet, at the safe, forgettable black dress she'd almost worn to blend into the background of her own life one more time, and then passed it to a garment bag she hadn't opened in 3 years. "I want to walk into that gala tonight," she said, crossing the room. "And I want every person in it to understand exactly who they've been overlooking." She unzipped the bag. Indigo silk spilled out, shimmering, threaded with gold embroidery that told a story older than Tae-min's entire family fortune. Her grandmother's design, reworked by a designer in Dakar, a dress Tae-min had once called too much and forbidden her from wearing anywhere he'd be seen. Grace inhaled sharply. "You've had that this whole time?" "I wore the sketch to my dissertation defense," Amina said. "I never had the courage to wear the finished dress in his world." "Well," Grace said, already reaching for her phone, "he's about to see it. And there's one more thing. While you get dressed, I'm calling Director Park at the Lee Foundation. She's been trying to reach you directly for months about a solo exhibition. She'll be at the gala tonight. So will 2 other gallery owners who've been asking about your research since spring." Amina's hands paused on the zipper. "Tonight." "Tonight," Grace confirmed. "So get dressed fast, Dr. Diallo. You have a room to walk into, and considerably less time than you think." The dress fit like it had been waiting 3 years for exactly this moment. Amina stood in front of the mirror as Grace fastened the final hook at the back, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The indigo silk caught the light and released it again in slow waves, the gold embroidery tracing patterns across her shoulders like something between armor and poetry. "You look like you stepped out of a different century," Grace said quietly. "One where nobody had to apologize for taking up space." Amina thought of her grandmother, who had worn similar cloth to markets and weddings with the same unshakable posture, a woman who had never once needed anyone's permission to be seen. "I spent 3 years making myself smaller," Amina said. "Smaller voice, smaller ambitions, because he told me that was the price of belonging in his world. And now," she met her own eyes in the mirror, and for the first time, she didn't flinch from what she saw. "Now I understand I was never the one who didn't belong." There was one more thing left to decide. Amina's hand hovered over a small velvet box on the vanity. "My wedding ring," she said, opening it. The band caught the light, cold and unremarkable now. "I've worn this every day for 3 years like it was proof I mattered to someone." She closed the box without putting the ring on. "Tonight, I don't need it to prove anything," she said. "Tonight, I know exactly what I'm worth." Grace's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smiled. "Director Park just confirmed. She's expecting you personally, and she'd love for your research to come up naturally in conversation, if the moment presents itself." "It'll present itself," Amina said. "I'll make sure of it." She picked up her clutch, took one final look in the mirror, not at the wife Tae-min had discarded, but at the woman she had almost forgotten she used to be, and walked toward the door. Behind her, unseen, the black dress still hung untouched in the closet, exactly where she'd left the version of herself who used to wear it. She wouldn't be needing her again. Inside the Hanwoo Gala, Tae-min stood beneath a chandelier the size of a small car, one hand resting at the small of Yoon Soi's back, the other raised in a toast to a circle of investors who laughed a beat too loudly at everything he said. Seo-hee was radiant in a way that turned heads, tall, polished, sharp-eyed, playing her part well, laughing at the right moments, touching his arm at the right intervals. The picture-perfect ornament he'd built this evening around. "To new beginnings," Tae-min said, lifting his glass, thinking of Busan, of expansion, of everything except the woman he'd left crying, or so he assumed, in an empty apartment across the city. He never noticed the ripple of attention start at the far end of the ballroom. It began small. A pause in one conversation. A head turning. Then another. The string quartet near the entrance faltered, the way musicians do when something unexpected pulls their eyes from the sheet music. By the time the ripple reached Tae-min's circle, it wasn't a ripple anymore. It was a wave, and every wave rolls toward the same shore, toward whoever was standing at the gold doors of the ballroom. An investor beside Tae-min trailed off mid-sentence. "Who?" the man asked slowly. "Is that?" Tae-min turned, mildly annoyed at the interruption. And then he saw her. Amina stood in the doorway, indigo silk pooling around her like something out of myth, gold embroidery catching the chandelier light, chin lifted, spine straight, utterly unbothered by 300 eyes suddenly fixed on her. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't shrinking. She looked, unmistakably, like a woman who had never once needed this room's approval, and had simply decided, tonight, to grace it with her presence anyway. Beside Tae-min, Seo-hee's smile faltered for the first time all evening. "Tae-min," she said quietly, "who is that woman?" His glass hung forgotten in his hand. "That," he said, the words barely making it out, "is my wife." Across the ballroom, Director Park set down her champagne glass and moved toward the doors with quiet, purposeful steps, a warm smile already forming. "Ms. Diallo," she said, extending a hand. "I've been hoping to meet you in person for months." Amina took it, calm and gracious. "Director Park, I understand we have quite a bit to discuss." Behind them, Tae-min stood frozen beneath the chandelier, watching his carefully constructed evening begin, quietly and irreversibly, to unravel. Word moved through the ballroom faster than Tae-min could control it. Within minutes, half the room understood that the elegant woman speaking with Director Park was not some unexpected guest. She was Jung Tae-min's wife, the woman he'd reportedly deemed unfit to attend his own company gala. Tae-min crossed the floor quickly, Seo-hee trailing half a step behind, uncertain now whether to hold his arm at all. "Amina," he said, voice low, urgent. "What are you doing here?" "I was invited," Amina said, turning to him with a terrible, composed calm. "By Director Park. To discuss a solo exhibition of my research." She let that settle. "You never mentioned her emails, Tae-min, or the Lee Foundation, or Yua." The color drained from his face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "3 opportunities," Amina said quietly. "3 times you called ahead and made sure I never knew they existed, so that no one in your world would ever see what I was actually worth." A nearby investor, one of the men Tae-min had spent the last hour courting for the Busan expansion, set down his drink slowly. "Tae-min," he said, "is this true?" Seo-hee stepped back half a pace, her earlier polish cracking into something colder. "You told me your wife didn't understand your work," she said. "That she'd stepped back by choice." "Seo-hee, that's not." "You sabotaged her career," she said, disbelief hardening into disgust. "So you could parade me around a ballroom instead." The circle around them had grown into a small, silent audience now. Investors, board members, old society names, all watching the gleaming show everyone had gathered to celebrate slowly come apart in real time. Amina let the silence hang a moment longer. "I came here tonight not to fight you," she said finally. "I came because I finally understand what you never wanted me to know, that I was never the one who didn't fit this room. You were simply too afraid to stand next to a woman who might outshine you." Somewhere near the doors, a man in a charcoal suit, Han Ji-hoon, representing his design firm, watched the entire scene unfold with quiet astonishment and something that looked distinctly like admiration. Beside Tae-min, Director Park's phone buzzed with a message from the gallery board. They were already discussing exhibition dates. The ballroom had gone almost entirely silent now. The string quartet abandoned mid-note. Waiters frozen at the edges of the room with trays no one was reaching for. Seo-hee unclasped the borrowed diamond bracelet at her wrist, a piece Tae-min had loaned her for the evening, clearly meant to be photographed, and pressed it into his hand. "I came here tonight because you told me this was a partnership," she said. "Professional. Mutual. I didn't sign up to be a weapon you used against your own wife." She looked at Amina, something like an apology flickering across her face. "I didn't know about the emails. If I had, you wouldn't have known," Amina said, not unkindly. That was rather the point of his plan. Seo-hee turned back to Tae-min. "Find someone else to complete your image. I'm done." She walked toward the doors, heels striking marble in sharp, deliberate strokes, leaving Tae-min alone in the center of a circle of people who had, only an hour ago, hung on his every word. One of the investors cleared his throat. "Given what we're learning tonight about your character," he said quietly, "I think the board will want to revisit our position on Busan." Gentlemen, please. This is a private matter. Is it? The investor asked. You just spent an hour telling us how much you value transparency. We just watched you lie to your wife, sabotage her career, and parade another woman in front of 300 people to prove a point about your own status. That tells us everything we need to know about how you'll treat a partnership when it's inconvenient. The circle of investors began, quietly, and without further comment, to disperse. Tae-min stood alone beneath the chandelier that, an hour earlier, had crowned him the man of the evening. Now it only illuminated exactly how much he had lost. Across the room, Amina watched him for a long moment, not with triumph, but with something quieter and far more final. Then she turned to Director Park. Now, she said, about that exhibition. Her phone buzzed once in her clutch. An unknown number. Grace mentioned you might be here tonight. I hope that's true. Ji-hoon. She didn't read the rest yet. There would be time. Tonight belonged to something bigger than a message. 3 weeks later, the gallery in Gangnam smelled of fresh paint and cut flowers, and Amina Diallo stood at the center of it in a plain black dress that somehow commanded more attention than any gown ever could. The exhibition, Threads Between Worlds, filled the space with textiles and photographs drawn directly from her dissertation research, exploring the quiet, powerful exchange between West African and Korean cultural traditions across 3 generations. The reviews are already calling it the most compelling debut of the season, Director Park told her, squeezing her hand. 2 other galleries have reached out about a touring version. Amina smiled, still adjusting to the strange, warm sensation of being seen fully rather than quietly managed. Her phone buzzed against her palm. She glanced down, expecting another congratulations from a colleague. It was Tae-min. Can we talk? Please. She looked at the message for a long moment, felt the old pull of habit rise and settle, and then turned her phone face down on the table beside her without responding. Some doors, once closed, were meant to stay that way. Everything all right? Director Park asked. Better than all right, Amina said, and meant it. Near the entrance, Han Ji-hoon arrived, dressed simply, holding 2 cups of coffee instead of champagne. A small, deliberate choice that told her he understood exactly what kind of evening this was meant to be. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said, taking the cup he offered. I wasn't going to miss it, he said. Though I've been rehearsing what to say for 3 weeks, and I still don't have anything better than. I'm glad the world finally gets to see what I saw at that symposium years ago. Amina laughed, soft and unguarded, a sound that felt entirely her own. They spoke for a long while, easily, about her research, about his work, about nothing consequential at all. The kind of conversation that asked for nothing and demanded no performance. The kind she hadn't experienced in longer than she cared to admit. There's something freeing, she said, about building something because you want to, not because you're trying to prove you deserve to exist in someone else's world. Ji-hoon studied her for a moment. I'd like to see what you build next, he said. If you'll let me. Amina considered the question, considered the man asking it, and found, for the first time in years, that the answer came easily. I think I'd like that, she said. Behind her, near the gallery entrance, a familiar figure lingered for a long moment, then turned and walked back out into the cold evening air without ever stepping inside. Amina didn't need to see him to know he had come. She simply continued the conversation in front of her, unbothered, entirely present in a life that finally, fully belonged to her. 6 months later, Jung Tae-min sat alone in a smaller office than the one he used to occupy. A modest consulting position, the Busan expansion long collapsed, the board having quietly replaced him after the investors withdrew their confidence one by one. He scrolled through his phone during a lunch break he took alone, the way he took most things now, and stopped on an article shared widely that week. Threads Between Worlds extended for a second national tour, with a glowing profile of its curator, Dr. Amina Diallo, described as one of the most vital new voices in contemporary cultural scholarship. The photograph showed her at the opening, radiant in deep green, laughing at something just out of frame, a tall man in a simple gray suit standing close beside her, not performing anything, not posing for status, simply present. Tae-min set the phone down and looked out at the ordinary street below, at ordinary people living ordinary lives he had once claimed, with such total conviction that he could never accept. He thought of the mirror in their old bedroom, of the words he'd said to her reflection instead of her face. "You don't fit the image." He understood now, far too late, that he had never been protecting his image at all. He had been protecting himself from the truth that the woman standing quietly beside him all those years had always been the most remarkable person in every room they ever entered, and that his own smallness was the only thing that had ever needed hiding. Across the city, in a gallery filled with warm light and her own hard-won work, Amina Diallo stood surrounded by people who had never once asked her to be smaller. She wasn't waiting to be chosen anymore. She wasn't asking permission to take up space. She had built the room herself, and for the first time in her life, she stood at its exact center, fully seen, fully hers. If this story moved you, don't scroll past it in silence. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Amina's place? And if you believe every woman deserves to take up her full space in the world, hit subscribe, because her story is far from the last one we're going to tell.